Hello everyone, my name is Eve Marshall. I am an artisan felter and I've come on today to show you how to make a wet felted butterfly. So as an example, we've got these little butterflies made from merino wool roving, which they sell at Riverside beads. So the reason to make a butterfly, they make a great brooch if you stitch a brooch back on. I've done lots of them with a friend of mine and she's made a copper chain to go around the backs of them and wear them as a necklace. If we were allowed to go out to weddings, they make great little fascinators. So yeah, it's just sort of quite an easy project to do. It's quite quick too, so that's why I wanted to come on and show you how to make them. So I'm just gonna squeeze you down there so you can have a look at my work table. So I've got a couple butterflies that I made in some other lives. I've got a piece of bubble wrap, bubbles facing up, and it's on top of a towel which is on top of my table. So just need something that's going to absorb the water a bit. So we're not using loads of water, so you don't get extremely wet. You just want to protect your table. So I've got an oilcloth cover on my table and then a towel and then a piece of bubble wrap. In my little water jug over here, I've got a squirt of green fairy liquid and the rest is nice warm bath water. I've got a little bowl over here to collect the water and the supplies. So I am going to make a bluish, greenish, pinkish butterfly today. So I've got some black wool and some different blues there. These are all pieces of merino roving. Great for wet felting, good for needle felting, and that's what we're going to use. So to get started, you need to have a piece of acrylic felt. So I've cut out this butterfly, as you can see from this piece of acrylic felt. The reason I use acrylic felt to start off with is because I want my butterfly to hold its shape. Okay, so that is very stiff butterfly there. If I just made it out of wool, then you'd get something that is felted and lovely, but a little bit floppy. And so if you're wearing that as a brooch, it would be hard to tell it was a dragonfly the whole time because it would be quite floppy. So if you have something on the inside of your piece, it means it's like a resist and it sort of helps hold its shape so it can't shrink into a weird shape either. So it's sort of like a stencil, but it's stuck inside of your piece. So I've just cut that piece out of a piece of acrylic felt, so that sort of plasticky felt that people use for crafting. That's there. So I'm going to start with my black wool and I'm just going to pull off little pieces and lay them in one direction on top of my bubble wrap. What I want to do is make a piece that is about the size of my template. So I'm just gonna move you over a bit there so you can see a bit more. It is easier to wet felt fibers if they are quite fine. So you never really want to lay down really thick layers at once because it will take you a lot longer to wet felt them. So try and teach like the instant gratification of felting rather than the felting for days or rolling for hours felting. So fine layers are better. You can see that my template fits right in there. Now I'm going to do a layer going in the opposite direction. Again, really fine pieces. The more gentle you pull the wool, the more fluffier your wool will be. There. So just do a layer. I see lots of you are watching. If you have questions, let me know. I'm happy to answer them. I've got my jug here with a little bit of fairy and some warm water in. Just gonna shake that on top. So I've just put some holes in my lid just so it comes out slowly rather than a waterfall on top. So that's nice and wet now. I'm going to put my template on top of that there and press it down with the other side of the bubble wrap. So bubble wrap is always, the bubbles are always facing what you're working on, so always touching the wool, and it just means it's a surface that won't stick to your hands. And because of all the little ravines in between the bubbles, the water stays in place rather than moving off the table and onto your floor or onto your lap. So now what we want to do is we want to pull the edges over onto our butterfly. So I'm just going to tease those bits apart there and tease these bits apart here and do the same for those bits there. Just so that when I pull my design, my black wool over my template doesn't change really the shape of my butterfly. So I'm just going to fold my pieces up to the edges of my butterfly template on there. Just pull them round. I want them right butting up against my template. I don't want them to be too loose around it, so I'm just pulling them taut. Because there's soap in the water, my hands aren't really attaching to the fibers. If there wasn't soap there, it'd be a bit of a pain. It would want to stick to me instead of to itself. So the soap is an acting of a lubricant, so things don't stick to us. So we just bring them round so we still get that shape there of our butterfly. Just pushing them in with your fingers so that it's a nice tight shape. And then we just fold that back on top and give it a good press. Okay, so if I turn this over now, you can see that the back of it is black. And now I want to do the same on the front of it. So I want to cover that with a layer of wool. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to lay fibers going in one direction on top of my butterfly, all going in the same direction. So to make something wet felt, it's easiest if you have the fibers going in two different directions. So we do a layer going in one direction and a layer going in the opposite direction. For this butterfly, which is probably like about A6 size, I'm using about 10 grams of wool, which is about half of a piece of wool that they sell at Riverside. So you get a couple butterflies out of each. And just shake some more soapy water on top. Don't want too much, it's already quite wet anyways. Press down the bubble wrap on top, soak all the water in and flip it over. So then when we peel off here, the edges of my template, I can see there. I know it's hard to see on the camera because it's black on black, but again, I'm just going to pull that bit apart there and that bit apart there and tease it apart there and apart there, because butterfly has like 4 wings, doesn't it? So we're sort of dividing up those bits. And I'm just folding it over again. So yeah, you could start with a black piece of acrylic felt and then your butterfly would be black, but the merino wool wouldn't stick to it because it's plastic rather than wool. So creating a base means that your next layer of fiber is attached to it. So we're just sort of covering it up with the black wool, pulling it in nice and taut all the way around. So as I'm moving the fibers up against the template, I can feel it get quite taut against it. I can also feel that it's sort of thick in some areas and thin in others. Don't really worry about that because it will all fuse together during the wet felting process. So Squeeze that again so it's all flat, and I'm just wiping off my fingers because my fingers get so wet and then it gets so sticky afterwards. So I've got my butterfly template here. I guess I'm imagining that that is the top wings and that is the bottom wings. Your butterfly doesn't have to be a specific butterfly. It can just be whatever colors you want. I don't worry too much about the backs of my butterflies because usually it's going to be made into a brooch or, like I said, a fascinator or a necklace or something, so don't really worry about what's on the back, but you could if you wanted to. Okay, so I've got my black base. I'm going to make the top two wings one colour and the bottom two wings a different colour so that they stand out a bit. So I've just got some turquoise here. I'm just going to pull off chunks. I'm pulling them from the centre of it rather than the end because I want them to bend in the middle so that I get that fluffy bit that goes off the edge and the sort of bent bit in the centre, so it's got an end. I quite like when things come off the edges of my butterfly wings because it means that it will hold it more in place, and it also looks quite nice going around that outer edge rather than just having the stark black. So I've got turquoise upper wings, I'm going to have pink bottom wings, same thing. I'm holding the wool so it's folded in half, and then I'm just pulling off a couple chunks to lay in there. So we've got very tropical butterfly going on here, and it wants to stick to me rather than down there, so instead of just putting my hand on it, I'm just gonna fold over the bubble wrap and push it down. Because I've got those bits that are coming off the edge of my butterfly, I'm just gonna flip it over and pull those edges in. So this is the back of my butterfly. I'm not really worried too much about what it looks like. You know, it's one of those things you could do if you wanted to. I quite like the quickness of this craft because you can make multiple in an hour rather than just making one very detailed one. So press that down again and we'll flip back over to the front again. So I've got sort of blue bits and pink bits, so I might add in some other colours. I've got a little bit of light blue. I might just put in down a stripe there and a stripe on top. And then I've got some green here. Might just put some green going through the middle of it, so you can be sort of artistic as you want during this stage. I've got here some silky threads too that I like to add into my pieces, so I'm just going to add those in there to add a bit of shininess. You can see that everything wants to stick to me. It's because my fingers are wet, so I just move those over there. I have some sparkly fibers here, some Angelina, that I'm just going to mix with some wool and put them on. So I'm going to take off a little bit of dark blue and a little bit of Angelina and just mix them up together. If I didn't mix them up together and I just laid them on top of my butterfly, they wouldn't felt in because Angelina is made out of plastic and it wouldn't combine with the wool unless it was had sort of mixed in, so you're sort of tangling it up with it. So you can lay it on and then put a veil over it, but if you really want it to sort of stay stuck, then that's the easiest way. So I have a little bit of sparkle in there now and a bit of blue wool. I'm just going to lay in there so my butterfly is a bit sparkly, maybe a bit in the middle too. And then I've got these little white dots which are called neps, and they're quite fun to use. They don't actually stay where you put them, they kind of move around, which is quite nice in the wet felting process. I like that nothing is really permanent, it will just do what it wants to do when it wants to do it. So I don't mind, I can embrace that. It makes it playful. It's a bit like watercolour, you know, you can't really control it, it will do what it wants to do. So I've just got some turquoise wool and I'm just mixing some of those little white dots in there. If you didn't have any extras at home, you could use like embroidery threads or knitting wool or things like sequins and beads are a bit hard. They're a bit better to do after you've felted it and stitched them on because they don't have any rough edges to attach into the piece. So I would save those and stitch them on after. So I've just put those down there. Again, I'll just give it a press. Instead of pressing with my hands, it's better if you press it with the bubble wrap, and I'm just folding those bits in there. So that's just the back. I'm not too worried about the back. Give it a press, flip it back over. I've got my butterflies pretty much ready to go. He just needs a body. So I'm going to go back to my piece of black here and pull off a long chunk. Most butterflies, their body sticks out the bottom of their wings, but some of them don't. It's sort of up to you whether it goes just in their wings or it sticks out the top. So quite big piece of merino wool here. I'm going to tie one end in a knot. That's going to be his head or her head. So I've got the knot there and the fluffy bit coming off there and a fluffy bit coming off there. So the head is going to sit in the inner bit of the top wings and go down there, and I'll just flatten that down, holding it in place, and flip it over. So I've got like the big troll hair bit there. I don't need that on my butterfly, so I'm going to fold it so it's going over that knot and onto the back of my butterfly. I also don't need that long of a tail on my butterfly, so I'm just going to fold that up there. And it will just get attached into the back of the butterfly there. So it's wet enough. Give it a press. And flip it over. And see, my butterfly is ready to go. So I'm going to start wet felting it. So a bit more water on top and fold over the bubble wrap and then a little bit of water on top. And I'm just going to start rubbing that with my fingers to make all of the wool attach. So we're sort of gentle to begin with, so that we're not moving things around, and then we can get a bit rougher with it. So if you look at wool under a microscope, it's got little tiny barbs on it. When you add warm water, those barbs open up, and when you agitate them, they fuse together. So once you've felted something, it's impossible to bring back to the fluffy wool that it began with. So that one there, I couldn't pull that apart and make it into that fluffy wool anymore. It's changed its sort of chemical makeup, or I'm not a scientist, so that's probably not the right word, but so this is agitating sort of the top layer of wool onto the black bit of wool. I'm just going to turn it over now and do a bit on the other side. So if you've come to one of my workshops at Riverside, then during the wet felting process, I usually hand out my little octopuses because they help do this without touching the piece too much. So, but you know, not having one doesn't mean you can't wet felt. You can just use your hand to rub it together. I just want to go until everything is stuck down. So it's a couple minutes on one side and a few more on the front, because you've got a bit more going on the front. It's better to use warm water when you're pouring it onto your butterfly. It's a lot more chance that the felting process will happen. Cold water will do it, but it takes a bit more effort to make it felt during that time. So just giving it a good rub. Fuse all those bits together. Okay, if I open it up now, I want to make sure things are staying in place. So if I give them a poke, I can see they've stuck to the black background. That means it's ready to be sort of the stronger bit of felting to be done. So we did sort of the gentle stage, and now we're going to be a bit rougher with it. So I'm just going to take it, I'm going to fold it in half and just squeeze out some of the water, not a lot of the water. And I want it wet and I want it heavy, but I don't really want it dripping down my arms. So keep it moist. You can see the head there, that's fine. And I'm just going to fold it in half and then gently push it back and forth against itself. You can see as I'm doing that, those lovely little white neps are moving to where they want to be rather than where I put them, and that's okay. That happens during the wet felting process. It makes it artistic, I'd say. If you wanted something that looked specifically like the exact butterfly in a book, then best to cut it out of pieces of acrylic felt and glue it all together. This is more of a playing thing. So I'm just going back and forth, rubbing up and down, and it's just wet felting the middle layer together, so all that black wool is starting to shrink. So I just go sort of back and forth, and as I'm going I can feel it getting a bit drier, so I'm just going to shake some more water on it now. If you had it too dry when you were rubbing it, then the layers could try and pull themselves off, which we wouldn't want. So that soapy water is very good for making your butterfly. You don't want it ever too dry at any point in the wet felting process. That's why it's called wet felting. So if it's ever dry and your hands aren't full of soap, then you need to go back and add more water and add more soap to it. So now I've done going that direction, I'm going to go this direction. And it's the nice thing, because we started with a piece of acrylic felt, it can only shrink until it hits the acrylic felt, and that's really nice. It's a nice project for a beginner because your piece doesn't change shape. It doesn't go sort of wibbly wobbly like say a picture does when you felt it. So you have a bit more control over what's happening because we've stuck a resist in the middle of it. So it's just a bit more of this rubbing until it's nice and firm. So when we started rubbing, it was a bit floppy and it felt like it was quite delicate. Now that I'm rubbing it, it's a lot stiffer and it doesn't feel very delicate. It's holding its shape there, and everything is pretty much fused. You know, the neps and things, they'll move around, but they always do. So it's just a question of getting it completely felted and just going around rubbing the pieces together. These are lovely once you've felted them because you could stitch loads of beads onto them, or like I was saying, sequins onto them. You can add some wire for their antenna. I mean, the Riverside beads, when I went there last year, it was just full of the most sparkling beads that would look amazing on these. So now I've gone back and forth on there. It has felted itself together and I can feel that the head is almost felted, so I'm just going to take the head now and rub it on top of the bubbles, just to fuse those sides, because I can't really access those sides with my hands when I'm rubbing it back and forth, so that is just sort of pulling those edges in and fusing them together. So the bubble wrap is sort of like a sandpaper and sort of pushing all the fibres together. Oh, sorry, it's making my camera move back and forth. Okay, so we've got his head in there. I'm going to give it a nice squeeze. You can see how rough you can be with them, even though they started off being very fluffy and very delicate. Now that it's felted together, I can squidge it into a ball and I'm not worried about it anymore. So I'm just, if I was doing this as a class, I would rinse it under the tap and get some of the soap off of it, but because I'm with you guys, I will just squeeze it in a towel. So you can see there that some of the neps have started to pull themselves off. I can leave them in there, or I can give them a tug and they'll come off. The head is there and the tail's down there, so we've got a nice felted butterfly. Now there's different ways that you can use them. I know that there was only a couple of you, hello, while we started off. So I was saying that they're great because they hold their shape so well, so they're really stiff inside them. If you just make something out of wool, it tends to do what it wants, but it also goes a bit fluffy. It goes a bit floppy. Yeah, there's the word. It goes a bit floppy. You don't want something that's too floppy if you want to make it into, say, a brooch or a fascinator or a necklace. You want it to hold its shape. So because we've put a piece of acrylic felt in there, it means it's really stiff and it's very strong, and it would be a really nice surface to stitch onto, or if you wanted to needle felt onto it, then you could. This one here, if I hold it up to the camera, I did some free motion embroidery on it. So with my sewing machine, I just added some definition to it. Felting onto wool is a lovely, lovely surface to stitch into, either with beads or with your machine. Is quite a nice thing to do. Anyway, that was my quick demo of the day. Thank you for watching, and if you have any questions, you can put them in the comments and I'm happy to answer them. And I hope you all have a nice day. Thank you. Bye-bye.